I am now live. Hello everyone. Welcome to a random Tuesday in my kitchen once again, where we will be talking about all things ancient Egypt. And today what I wanted to focus on is the ka. So I was up really late last night looking through images and from ancient Egypt, from all of my trips, and trying to put some things together. And one of the things that I was drawn to was a beautiful carvings in Hathor's temple at Dendera. And there were these depictions of the king sitting on a throne, and he had this symbol on the top of his head that is known as the ka. And I think we've talked about the ka before in the past, but we're going to talk about it a little more today. So I'm just trying to find, I have a card here of the ka that I wanted to show you, that if I was prepared, I would have had that pulled out for you. But the ka is one of 9 bodies that the ancient Egyptians believed that we have. And it represents our spirit. If you have my deck of cards, it looks like this. It's the ka. So this is a symbol that I was seeing on the top of the head of the king sitting on his throne inside this chapel at Dendera. And I found it really fascinating because offerings were being given to the king sitting on his throne with this ka symbol on top of his head. This is something that needs to be kept alive. So as part of all of the bodies that we have, the ka is our spirit, and that is part of it. And yes, I have an oracle deck. It is the Oracle of Sichet, which I was thinking about that last night too. I need to be sharing more about that. But the ka is, I feel like I'm starting over again. So the ka is one of 9 spiritual bodies that we have. It represents the spirit. And the ancient Egyptian beliefs and practices in the afterlife, they all had to do with feeding the ka and giving offerings to the ka in order for the person who was deceased to be able to survive in the afterlife. And if they didn't have their ka, if their ka wasn't fed, if their ka wasn't given water, then they would be dehydrated, they would starve, they wouldn't be able to continue in the afterlife. So the ka was really important to take care of. And in the offerings we'll see an offering stela where offerings are being given to the deceased, and it's for the ka of, and then the deceased person. And sometimes we'll even see that with the Neteru or the gods, where they're giving offerings to the spirit of the god. One of the things that, speaking of spirits of the gods, one of the things that I wanted to share today was something that might enhance your spiritual practice. And that is when you have a statue of a god or a goddess, it could potentially be the ka statue of the god or goddess. So in ancient Egypt, they would oftentimes, that's why they mummified the bodies, so that the ka had the kat in order to recognize itself within the afterlife. If something happened to the mummy, sometimes if you were rich enough, then you had a statue that was made. That was your ka statue. And so this is where your spirit and all of the 9 body parts would recognize that this is a part of you, and that, okay, everything is okay. And so statues of the gods and goddesses were also imbued with the ka, or the spirit of the neter. And in some of my research in the past, I came across some interesting texts that talk about how the pharaoh would travel from place to place, and he would visit the temples, and he would go and be there for the birth of Horus, or the birth of Anubis. And what that was referencing was that the king would go to the temples, and there would be a ritual or a ceremony in which the pharaoh would enliven these statues with the ka of the gods and goddesses. That was part of his priestly duty as the king. And so in our own spiritual practice, if you have a statue of a god or a goddess, you could also perform an imbuing of the ka ritual with your statue to enliven it. And this is something that can be very, very special and very, very meaningful for you in your practice, and kind of give new life and energy to not only your spiritual practice, but your space, your altar space, where you have your statue sitting there that you would present offerings to, or light incense for, or light a candle for them, or leave them a bowl of fruit or a glass of water or milk, these kinds of things where you give offerings to them. All of these things feed the ka of the god who is inside the statue. In the same way that when the ancient Egyptians brought offerings of food and water and bread and all of these kinds of things, then they would be feeding the spirit of the person who's deceased. There's a question, a statue of ourself. How can we go about doing this? A statue of ourself. Okay, yeah, the god or the goddess. You are holding on to the ka inside of your body already. It's part of your spiritual bodies. So there were 9, and so I'm just going to list all of them for you, and you can come back and grab your pen and pencil if you don't have one right now. But the ka is one of them. It's your spirit. The ba is your soul. It's one of my favorites. The depiction of the ba is one of my absolute favorites in ancient Egyptian art. It is the sweetest, and I just love it to pieces. And I'll talk about that in another video. But there's the ba, the ka. You have the kaibit, which is your shadow. You have your ib or your ab, which is your heart. You have your ren, which is your name. You have your sahu, which is a very wise part of you. You have your ak, which is like the highest, most enlightened Buddha self of you that is inside of you. You have your sikem, which is your power, and you have your kat, which is your body. So there are these 9 spiritual bodies, and today we were talking a little bit about the ka, which is also one of I just love seeing it on the walls. And if you look at the post that I made today, and you use your fingers and you make the picture a little bit bigger, then you'll see what I was talking about, where the pharaoh is sitting there on his throne being given offerings, and he has this symbol of the ka on top of his head. So I just loved that. And the more that I travel through Egypt, and the more I go to the temples, I mean, yeah, we see the same wall, but there's always something more to look at and to see and to appreciate in the meaning of what's being depicted on the wall, what they're the story that they're trying to tell, even though, Egyptologists, there's a lot of propaganda, things like that, but it's still there, and it still has great meaning. So it's really fun to be able to see that. So make sure you check out the post that I have. And I made it a reel because, I don't know, Instagram seems to like reels better now. And I'm a photographer, not a videographer. So as you can see, it's kind of challenging. But so I made it a reel. But still, you should be able to bigify it and see that. And you'll notice also that it's like all been scratched out and defaced. And this was part of the way that the people, they would take away the spirit. So they would, you'll see that oftentimes with the names will be scratched out, or the faces of the gods and goddesses are scratched out. And that's so that in the afterlife, if they can't breathe, that's a problem, because all of the images were enlivened. All of the images on the temple walls, they have that Ka spirit in them. The offerings are being made every day because they're on the wall of the tomb or in the temple. So if its face is gone, then there's a problem in the afterlife. They don't have the ability to breathe. They don't have the ability to eat or drink. If their name has been scratched out, then they don't have their name in the afterlife. And so much of like the Book of the Dead and the coffin text, they talk about like knowing the name of something so that you have power over it. So can you imagine if here in this life, if your name is written down somewhere and it's scratched out, then in the afterlife, you'll be without your name. No one is saying it. No one is speaking it. No one is remembering it. And then you're wandering around, wondering what to call yourself and what you are so that you can know how to, deal with things in the afterlife. So the Ka is a really interesting concept within ancient Egypt. The Ka also is something that Khnum would build on his potter's wheel when he was building the humans. He would not only build their body, but he would also build their Ka. And pharaohs were known to have multiple Kas, not just one, but multiple Kas because they were the pharaoh and I guess extra super special. So you'll also see those depicted in the art in the Memeses, which are the birth houses at the temples. So I don't want to keep you too long, but I hope that this was informative, that you learned a little bit of something about the Ka, about the post that I shared from the Hathor temple in Dendera, and that I have an oracle deck. So I'll post something about the oracle deck here in just a little bit. And thank you so much for joining me today and being a part of my Instagram and supporting me. So go live about my deck soon. Okay, so I'm going to end this one and maybe I'll do another live right away. All right, so it's going to take me like 5 minutes to end this live and type all the things you have to type in there. So give me a moment and we'll come on and talk about that. Thanks for joining.